Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to the Beit Midrash. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody had a good 2 weeks since I wasn't here last week. And just before I started recording, I hear this week's going to be a heated conversation on Parshat Chayei Sarah. So looking forward to some good conversation. Before I do that, though, I hear you guys caught up with Lech Lecha and Vayera last week. I just wanted to see if there was any lingering questions or anything that came up last week that you guys were like, we don't know, we should ask the rabbi next week, or any lingering thoughts, ideas, questions that were there.
Rabbi, doesn't rabbi mean teacher?
Yes.
We had a great rabbi last week. Last year, maybe too.
Rabbi really means like my teacher. So, but yes.
Well, okay, that gets you back in the job.
Yes. Anything stewing since last week that we need to go over, or everybody's good? Mm-hmm. All right. Then welcome to Parshat Chayei Sarah, our parsha for this week. And I heard there was some differing opinions on how y'all felt about this. So who'd like to start with some reaction to the world's oldest man and Rabbi Sacks' opinion on Chayei Sarah?
So I'll start. I reread this chapter as well, and the first thought that came to my mind is I can't wait to go to this class with Howard Bierman, because I don't like it, and if I don't like it, I'm really sure he's not going to like it either. Am I right, Howard?
So Howard, Diane, tell me what you didn't like about it.
You want me to start, or you want Howard to start?
Go ahead. You got the floor.
We're good Southern gentlemen. We'll let the ladies go first.
So the thing that I did not like about it is, for those people who are able to move on from whatever calamity they're dealing with, they are truly blessed. But we all know plenty of people who really struggle with moving on. And I think it's a little unfair, unrealistic, and really inappropriate to assume that people can just personally make that decision. I'm moving on. And so that's really the whole problem I have with this. And I love Rabbi Sacks, but I don't know if Howard planted the seed last week when he said he didn't like that chapter. But I looked at this
By
again.
the way, I wasn't thrilled with the last chapter either. But
so I read this and I was like, Rabbi Sacks is far more knowledgeable than I am. And how he could write such a thing, those who can move on are the winners. Well, they are, but there are just too many who carry huge scars that don't move on. That's my problem.
I mean, I agree with Diane. To me, it's like, he's saying, just get over it and just live for the future. And after you've conquered the future, then you can, go back to the past and deal with that. Well, that's so juvenile to me. I mean, there are tons of people can't do that sort of stuff. Most of us can't do that sort of stuff. And I mean, I don't think just because somebody doesn't talk about the past or doesn't talk about it to their family, that doesn't mean it doesn't affect their whole lives. It doesn't affect what they are. I just think he's very flippant about how he handles this whole thing.
Can I ask a question? Unfortunately, I couldn't make it last week, but the title, I'm back on Vayera, but the title of Vayera, his chapter, was The Space Between Us, right? Mm-hmm. And he didn't mention, this is, to me, one of the most significant parshas of the whole Torah, mm-hmm. which has to do with what happened with Lot and his wife and the Arcada, with Isaac. That wasn't even mentioned. I mean, why why did he choose this subject, I guess, amongst others, at least to mention it in his discussion?
Somebody who was here last week want to address that, address your conversation about that, or did you guys not address that?
Well,
I was not here last week either, so.
I don't think he's seeking to do a complete discussion of the Parsha in this. He's trying to take, the pages are so short that he's just taking one idea, which I like, frankly. So in defense of him, I think he just wants to make that one point. And then as far as, saying that there's so many people that can't move on, I think he's given an example of how it is possible to move on, just trying to maybe help people that can't. Say, yes, it can be done, but do it by planning for the future. Way I see it.
No, I mean, I think that's I think your answer is right, but I think he still could have at least made reference to it or something, because it's so critical, and every Sunday school kid hears these stories, but it wasn't even mentioned. So whatever.
It's coming up next week.
Oh, yeah, next week.
What I'll kind of say about Vayera briefly is, and his, or at least Rabbi Sacks's comments on Vayera. I feel like he only told half the story of it. I think only one of you was there last night, so I can feel like I can say this again. There's, in the Jewish tradition, there's a balance in relationship. There's a balance between transcendence and immanence, between love and awe. And, he seems to be preaching a little bit that you need that distance, you need that space, you need to push people away in order to bring them together. That's there's some value in that. Yes, you need to have space, and you need to allow people to step back. And the quote he has at the end from Matthew Syed, I think is a good one. Of part of our role as parents is we bring close, but at some point we have to give our children space to be able to build their own lives and create their own lives, even though it's at a cost to us as the parents. And I think that's true in every relationship. You need to give people that space, but you can't just give people space. You also need to bring them close to you. And that's what the love, and that's what the ahava, that's the transcendence part of it, is you have to have that balance between the two, because if you give too much space, there is no coming back together. Now, anybody else want to come back to Chaye Sarah, make any comments on any other thoughts, any other negative thoughts? Let's start with that. Any other criticisms of his comments on Chaye Sarah? Anybody want to, any supportive comments? Anybody like it?
I liked it.
All right, go. What'd you like, Eddie?
Well, I like the idea that you can move on after tragedy and events. And just, I like, for me personally, when he talked about how the Holocaust survivors went many years before they could talk about it, and couldn't talk about it to the end of their life. I had a man I knew growing up. He was a Christian, but he lived in our neighborhood. And he operated a little neighborhood grocery, and he was always so kind to us when we went in. Well, when he was in his 90s, in the last year of his life, he had some pretty severe illness, and he talked about how he had liberated a concentration camp and everything he saw, and how he dealt with it and how he felt about it. But he had never told anybody, including his wife and his children, that he was part of that till the last year of his life. So I could relate to that as well.
Barbara, you look like you were going to say something.
I wasn't as, I'm not being as specific as Eddie is, but I wanted to comment in defense of Rabbi Sacks altogether. And that is, that I really like, and I think Eddie already said this, I really like the fact that he is picking one thing out of the Parsha that he wants to address. And in this case with Sarah, even though we might not agree that it's practical for everybody to concentrate and deal with the future when you've had such a rough past, maybe it's a little bit of giving you something to try, that if you don't dwell on bad things in your past, it allows you the freedom to reorient yourself towards a worthy goal, which is today and your future. And then once you're stable there, you can adjust to balancing what's your future and what happens in your past. You can't ever get rid of the bad things that happen in your past, but you can learn how to deal in a different mindset with them. So I think that's the lesson he's saying in Sarah. And I think every time he's coming up with a benefit of it. And we know we're not dealing with the entire Parsha. Even as conservatives on the triennial cycle, we don't deal with the everything. So if we're doing it first part, middle part, end part each time, we're also missing part of the story. Maybe we're missing our favorite parts of the stories.
So look, this is how you write a Devar Torah, right? Like you can't cover the entire Devar, you can't cover everything in a Devar Torah. And that's what these are. These are little, they're Divrei Torah. They're little Divrei Torah. And I think, yes, I do think he's picking like one thing that he wants to focus on for this Parsha. Trust me, I got a whole bunch of other Rabbi Sacks books, and there are plenty of parshiot on every Torah. So I mean, he does cover them at other times. It's just not what he's focusing on here.
Yeah, I think Barbara's just a pushover. She's just so nice. She's going to say something nice about everybody.
Oh, he must be talking about Barbara Boyle.
I think he could have done better by saying that we shouldn't live in the past. I mean, I think that's a valid point. And I think that at least would resonate with me, that you don't forget the past, you don't deny the past or whatever, but you gotta move on. And I didn't really get that with this. I mean, anyway, he's not my favorite. Barbara's my favorite, but he's not my favorite.
So in Rabbi Sacks' defense, I just wonder if this is a possibility, even though I did not like his interpretation. It's not my favorite, and I've been reading Rabbi Sacks' books for a while. He wrote, this book was published in 2020. I think he passed away when, 2021 or 2022?
Yeah.
Very shortly after
2020.
He passed away in 2020. So maybe his being in a situation where he was confronting real challenges, he was trying to give us that lesson that he could do it, and maybe we could as well.
So let's maybe back up for 1 second here. What's his question? Typically with commentaries, it's good to sit before you go. They usually have a question that they're trying to answer, and then they answer it. So what's his question that he's trying to answer?
Is how do you deal with the big challenges?
Not
exactly
his question, I don't think.
Oh, why is
he says it at the bottom of 22, top of 23. It's like on 22, he says, when Abraham dies, the Torah, Genesis chapter 25, verse 8, that it's described that Abraham breathed his last and died in good old age, old and satisfied. It says his is the most serene death in the Torah, yet consider his life fraught as it was with trial after trial. He says, like at the bottom, that Abraham's life was full of disappointed hopes and delayed fulfillments. What kind of man was this that the Torah can say that he died in good old age, old and satisfied? So this is one thing that I always come back to, is I think this is one of the enduring beauties of the Torah, is unlike if you read Greek mythology, Roman mythology, our heroes are not perfect human beings. They have pretty significant flaws pretty consistently. Abraham does not have an easy life by any means. Yet when he dies in a good old age, old and satisfied. So great. We don't have easy lives either. We also have disappointed hopes. We have delayed fulfillments. We have tragedies. We have struggles. So the question I think he's trying to answer is, how can we have a death like Abraham? How can we, when we die, whenever that day may be, may it not be for many, many years, and each of us live to 120, how can we die in a old and satisfied, as Abraham was? So maybe that's a good starting point for the conversation, is how do we live a life that makes us feel satisfied and fulfilled in spite of all the things that the disappointments, the tragedies, the delayed fulfillments? You don't like his answer of focus only on the future and eventually maybe you get back to the past? Okay, that's fair. So what do you guys think then?
Well, I like the sentence he had in here at the bottom of 23 that said that he uttered not a single word of complaint. It seems that he realized that God wanted him to act, not to wait for God to do the work for him. So he continued to do his work.
Okay, so maybe that's part of it. Maybe we don't wait for God to make the miracle, but we work for the miracle ourselves. And if God provides a miracle, God provides a miracle. Hooray, that's great. But we are active participants in our life and not passively waiting for someone to do it for us. That might be part of it. Anyone else want to chime in? Did I actually stump you guys?
I'm carefully trying not to talk this week since I talked so much last week. I can get my voice back. But
you're here, Barbara. We'd love to hear from you.
I want to think about a totally different story, which is related to this. And I meant to find a Chumash or a Tanakh and find this part, but doesn't it say something else about Abraham's ultimate death, where it says something about not only being peaceful, old and satisfied, but it says something about words he uttered on his death or something like that. And the example I'm thinking about comes from a totally different source, also about the Sarah story, but this was from a different source that I read maybe last week. And it talks about how you handle things near the end of life. And a doctor had to tell one of his patients that you're in bad shape. You got to do, either this really risky procedure, or you can just comfortably, we'll keep the pain away, do and allow you to pass away. I don't know how the doctor would have exactly used those words, but it was either the procedure or just rest and let it go. And the doctor said, no, I got to talk to my rabbi. I mean, the patient said, no, I got to talk to my rabbi. I got to ask my rabbi what to do. And of course, the doctor said, you're going to get medical advice from your rabbi. That's not acceptable. But anyway, the rabbi came to meet with the doctor and the patient and recommended that the guy have the procedure. And the doctor, of course, went crazy and said, how, what are you going to force this man to suffer, etc., through the tough procedure that may or may not do him any good? And the rabbi said, he has a lot of opportunity during that time that he is going to live to pray, to do mitzvot. Many times he can say amen. And every time he says amen, what happens when you say amen? In this case, the rabbi said that an angel would be created every time he said amen. Now, is that something that you've heard of before? Because I think it was one
vaguely familiar from somewhere.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things we were told as kids, that the reason you want to make sure if somebody's doing a blessing that you join in and say amen, is that's how you populate the angel population. And the patient went through the procedure and he lived like another 30 years because all those angels are now pulling for him. So Sacks doesn't say it. I didn't go back and look at the actual Parsha. Maybe many, many times as he was dealing with his future and perhaps praying, like, I pray my car will start. Amen. That kind of thing. He said lots of amens, and all the angels were pulling for him and aided him to die in good old ancient age, old and satisfied. Sacks never mentions the angels.
Okay, so I'll go back to my question. How do we how do we create a life that when we die, we'll feel sad, old, satisfied, fulfilled in it?
Live right.
I just say be grateful. You're going to have a lot of adversity. I mean, that's part of life. Learn from that and be grateful for the things that every day are there for you. The sun comes up, the sun goes down, the world keeps turning. I mean, there's very basic things you can look for every day. And then, of course, you can add and add and add to that. Kind of helps you balance out each day.
Well, Barbara, I appreciate what you're saying. I happen to think that for each person, it's different. But I will tell you, since October the 7th, I am full of gratitude when I know that my family and I are safe and we can go to bed at night and not have someone break the door down and burn the house down and separate us. I'm eternally grateful. But I'm not sure that is bringing me fulfillment. I just feel that for each person, their path to fulfillment is different. And our job is to figure it out. What was the movie where I think is it Richard Palance? It's an actor, and he says for each person, it's a different thing.
City Slickers.
Yeah, I love that movie.
Jack Palance.
Jack Palance. Yeah, for each person, it's
It's a
different.
good movie.
And we, we're each on a mission to find that. Lately, one of my favorite stories is the story of Zusha, where we look at other people and their accomplishments, and we say, "Oh, I should be doing this, or I should be doing that, or why haven't I done the other?" But we each have to find what we're best at and do it. That's a challenge in and of itself.
Do you guys know the Zusia reference that she made? So for those who don't know, Reb Zusia was an early, hard to call him exactly Hasidic. The early Hasidic movement had a couple different branches that were, while it was formulating, and he was rather than establishing his own community, Reb Zusia was kind of a traveling preacher, and he would just go community to community teaching and spreading the word, but never actually established his own community. And I believe also relatedly, I don't think he ever published his own works because he never had a community to copy down his works. He just kind of went off talking and preaching and never actually wrote anything down. So pretty much most of what we have, I believe, is mostly people record, like who heard him and then would record his own teachings. If I remember correctly, he was also Rebbe Nachman of Breslov's uncle, if I remember correctly. But in any case, the reference that Diane made to Reb Zusia is one of his most famous quotes is, "When I die, I'm not worried, what I'm worried about when I die is not that they're going to say, why were you not like Moshe? Why were you not like King David? Why were you not like Abraham? I'm worried they're going to, when I stand before God, God's going to ask, why were you not Zusia?" Right? So, it's not about trying to live up to other people. It's about trying to live the best life you can live, is kind of his message. That when you die, you're not going to be asked, why were you not more like the heroes of our Bible? You're going to be asked, why were you not the best person you could be? One of my favorite teachings. So go ahead, Barbara.
I was going to say, I wish Margaret was here today, but Rabbi, this might be something that you're familiar with. Barbara mentioned being grateful, and gratitude journals, I think, are something that are suggested when you need to be conscious of good things are happening despite all the bad things that are happening. They may be smaller, they may be not. Are you familiar with that idea?
Yes.
I really don't know much.
So yes, I think it's therapists often use gratitude journals for those with depression, anxiety, trauma, those who feel quote unquote stuck in their life. That's one of the big recommendations they almost always go to is pause and think about what are the things you're actually grateful for? What are the things you're happy about? What are the things that are special? And write down 5 things every day. I've read a number of things who recommended just as general mindfulness, wellness recommendation is keep a gratitude journal and write down every day. You can do it first thing in the morning. You can do it before you go to bed at night. What are 5 things that you're grateful for today as a way of reframing your mind to focus not on all the darkness, not on all the bad things, but on something positive?
I would add, I think that's useful to anybody. But in these times, as I was listening to some of the comments like Diane's, it's particularly important to have hope. It can overwhelm you if all you see is all the negative. So at the end of your life, if you're saying, what is it that makes you have had contentment or be content? I don't know if that's the word you used, Rabbi. And I think if you keep dwelling on the negative and you get towards your older age and what you're losing, which people have lost as they get older, I think it's very important to keep its perspective and to be, I think defining the word content doesn't mean you're not personally trying to get better, even to the last breath. But, if you have the half empty rather than the half full mentality all your life, you're not going to be content at your death, I don't think. We'd be glad you're going.
So yeah, I agree. And that's one of the things most religions preach some sort of gratitude practice as a key cornerstone of spirituality. In the case of Judaism, it's largely tied in with this idea that you say 100 blessings every day, according to the Talmud. Why? Because every time you do something, you stop and appreciate the fact that you're doing it. That's the part of the point of a blessing, is to say, like, this is not an automatic act. The food that's in front of you is not an automatic act. It's a blessing. It's there for a reason, and it's something you should stop and be grateful for, and pause and show gratitude for it. Kids always get a kick out of it. Going to the bathroom, there's a blessing you say after you go to the bathroom. And does anybody know what the blessing says?
It's something about making my body parts work appropriately.
It says, like, thank you, God, for who has created this body with wisdom, and you've created holes and fillings. But it says, if any one of those holes is plugged up, and if any one of the other things, if one of the closed parts is open, I can't be here. I cannot stand before you. So it's a moment of, like, this is like a basic human act. And what do we say? We're grateful for the ability to go to the bathroom, because we can't survive if we don't.
I know a family that was extremely ticked off when their kids were taught that. And that was the end of that family in the day school.
Why?
No kidding. Over that one issue.
And it might have been a description, just like the rabbi just gave, rather than drilling it into your kids. I never knew of a time in the day school. Howard, your grandkids and kids were in day school before me. I don't know, or before mine were. It drove this family crazy. They just couldn't handle it.
But what were they upset about? I guess
they thought it was too much. They probably thought that, it was clearly something their kids knew and would do that they wouldn't, or didn't have the habit of it. I can't explain for the family. I just know that it was amusing.
So,
yeah.
I think the interesting about this, I wanted to say two things. So until October the 7th, I could not read the Song of the Sea. I thought it sounded so violent. It was troublesome to me. So I would always read that prayer that is in the prayer book rather than recite the Song of the Sea. Now I sort of changed. But I think I mentioned to the rabbi that I'm reading a memoir written by a Muslim woman, and they also do the same thing. They have a prayer that they recite upon going to the bathroom. So, this girl, this woman who wrote it when she was in school, one of her friends said, you're going to still go to the bathroom whether you say that prayer or not. You don't have to say it. And the young Muslim woman who left Islam, it was so ingrained in her that she was actually afraid something awful would happen if she went into the bathroom and she didn't recite that prayer. So I think that introducing the concept to our kids that they shouldn't take anything for granted is a great idea, because kids, I have a hard time learning that particular concept. But I thought it was so interesting to me that this woman who finds her faith so extreme, so much of what she writes reminds me of what we're taught as Jews.
And I think that story is exactly the point. Is yes, you're going to go to the bathroom whether you say the prayer or not. When you have food in front of you, you're going to eat the food whether or not you say the blessing. But it's a matter of, how do you as an individual connect? And how can you, the term is often called normal mysticism. How can you elevate these daily regular tasks into a holy experience? Or at the very least, how can you take these daily holy tasks and appreciate that you have them, and that this is something that God has given you, and that you can show kindness and graciousness and appreciation for it? Now, I want to back up one moment. I gave this sermon once a few years ago. It didn't go over well. But we're kind of having this conversation more generally. So I'll give you the thesis. My teacher, Reb Mimi Feigelson, once wrote a Devar Torah about, living a life so you have the death that you want. So think of it this way: as she says it, when you do die, again, God forbid, not for many years and not until all of us are 120. What do you imagine? What do you want that to look like when you die? And then, how can you live your life to get to that point? What do you need to do to be able to make that happen? You're shaking your head, Barbara, but
It makes me think of the people who die young, of the people who die of dread diseases. What can they do?
so I hear you, and at the same time, we do this with an acknowledgement. This activity is, what we plan, and we all know the proverb that, people plan and God laughs. So you're right. Like you can't, it's not a perfect science. You can't anticipate everything that's going to happen.
Well,
God forbid, we could be going to the store and get into a horrible car accident. We're not going to have the death that we envisioned, but I don't think that's the point. I think the point is, how do we live our lives so that whether or not it happens, how do we live our lives in a way that it's going to that we can bring it closer to that concept? Because I think that's ultimately the question: is what do we want to be feeling? What do we want to be thinking at that moment? And how can we live our lives so that we're closer to that and not looking back with regret, not looking back with hurt? And despite the disappointed hopes and delayed fulfillments, as Rabbi Sacks points out that Abraham had, despite those, how can we still feel satisfied in the end? But you're right, like it's not going to be perfect. And yes, there are people who are never going to have the opportunity to even think about this question. Yes.
So the second part of it is, it seems like you're coming close to the idea that I've heard when bad things happen. God never gives you anything that you can't handle or that you can't deal with. And I'm not saying that's a Jewish concept.
I'm not saying, I definitely didn't say that, but
No, I know you didn't say that, but it seems like you're approaching it.
I'll disagree with that, if that's okay.
You'll disagree with the idea that God doesn't give you things you can't handle. Because
I don't agree with that concept generally, and second, I don't think I'm approaching it either. I think what I'm saying is, you live your life in a way that you can look back and not feel like you have all these regrets and hurt that are unresolved.
I think that for some people, when they when that's told to them. I mean, it happens in I hear it in Alabama. I don't recall hearing it up north in a more Jewish society, but I hear it here. And I think that the only good thing about that is that it may cause the person who has suffered the loss to alter their life or alter their thought concepts and deal with something in a new way. So that is almost something Rabbi Sacks would say, maybe.
Maybe. Most of the people I know who have been told that have been said, that's awfully nice that God thinks I can handle it. I don't want it.
Yeah.
So the way I've heard it said in a Jewish perspective is that if everybody put their troubles on the table, you would pick up your own package. You wouldn't swap your problems for someone else's problems. Does that sound like the same thing, or does it sound like something different? Or is that a Jewish teaching, or is it just that I heard it from persons at Knesset Israel?
I have not heard such a teaching, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist in Jewish texts. It just means I haven't heard it. But
I didn't really,
I think what that's suggesting in that context is, you always think of your problems as the worst. But if you were to actually think of other people's problems and learn what other people are going through, your problems don't seem as bad anymore.
That's why you need to do a gratitude journal.
Yes.
So that you can keep things in perspective. Sorry, Barbara, if that's what you were going to say.
no, I was just going to say, I didn't hear the same thing you heard the rabbi saying, which means we all are listening with different experience. I'd like to trade for yours, Barbara, but, I just heard, more of there's always time if you haven't lived the life that you want to live to this point. And a lot of the times it doesn't happen like this until something very bad, an illness or something very bad happens to someone. They say, if I just get well, I'm going to live a better life. I'm not going to work as hard. I'm going to give more charity, And I guess if you're saying, how would you plan it? Is that you would have the insights and capacity to do that without trauma to yourself, without a big trauma that you would, and you're going to have those traumas, but how do you have the resilience to say there is something to look forward to?
Beautifully said, Barbara. Better than I said it. Now I do want to circle back to what Rabbi Sacks writes also. This is nominally on, this Beit Midrash is nominally on the book. So I do want to circle back. Again, I feel like I only half agree with what Rabbi Sacks is saying also. Going to some of the criticism that people had for him at the beginning of our discussion. I was reading this and I actually got really sad reading it because I actually was feeling really, because most cases, these Holocaust survivors did not talk about their experiences during the Shoah, even to their spouses, their children, and their closest friends. In a time in which, probably within my lifetime, we're not going to have any survivors left. And definitely within my children's lifetime. And to know that that's lost, on one hand, I'm very empathetic to the pain that they suffered and not wanting to relive it, and I completely understand where they're coming from. But from an academic historical perspective, there's also something really lost that we miss by them doing that. And in an age of Holocaust denial, that also kind of hurts a little too, to say, we had opportunities to learn from these people and they did not feel they were able to teach. not criticizing them. Again, I understand why not. It hurts a little too. On the flip side, I think building to the future and then coming back to the past, I'm not sure how I feel about that generally. I'm thinking of a friend of ours who was pregnant right around the time that Orly and I first got married. And we said to her, how did you and your husband decide like this was the time to have, like, now's a good time to have a baby? And she said, we decided, if we waited until we were at the right time of our careers, and we waited until we had enough money, and we waited until the right jobs, and we waited until all these things, like, it was never going to happen. So like this seemed as good of a time as any. And I feel a little bit like that's what Rabbi Sacks is saying too. Is like you need to build for the future, and then when the future is established, you come back to the past. Well, you can make that same argument. Like, when is the future established? When do you feel like it's going to be enough built that you can then reflect on the past? And the answer could, for some people, is never. I'm not convinced this is a psychologically healthy way to deal with it either. If you just kind of ignore the past long enough, then you can't, then it just, you'll deal with it eventually. As Howard said earlier, like, just because they didn't talk about it didn't mean it didn't affect them. And just because they didn't tell people that it was affecting them doesn't mean it didn't affect them. So how can we reflect on the past and learn from the past in order to build a better future is kind of the way that I generally look at it. Thoughts, comments, reactions?
Well, I feel like I've talked too much this session, but I do want to say that two separate individuals have told me when they had major issues in their family life and they went to a therapist, they found that talking about it didn't help, that talking about it just regurgitated all that pain that they had been dealing with, and it really was not beneficial. And I don't know enough, really. Maybe Barbara Royal could help me with this, but I didn't really know how to respond other than to say that I was sorry. And I did suggest to one to start writing down the things that you were struggling with, and that, maybe somehow keeping a diary of your pain would help to release it, since talking about it didn't help. I didn't really know how to respond.
Margaret, you want to chime in?
Yeah, somebody.
I'm sorry, I had someone at the doorbell, so I missed it until I got back here, but someone
look,
was trying to,
I'll say some of my concept of therapy is it's not just about talking about your problems and letting them out. I mean, that helps a little bit, but I don't think that's the ultimate goal of therapy. I think the ultimate goal of therapy, or a lot of therapies, there are some that you just talk and let it out and that's it. The ultimate goal is to say, okay, like, this is, why do you feel the way you feel? How did this make you feel? Reflect on what caused it, so that when a similar situation comes, you can respond differently next time. Or you at least understand where you're feeling and where you're coming from, so that you can be able to learn and move on. I don't think like just plain talking is used with a therapist. That in and of itself doesn't always help. It's about the deeper questions that the therapist can help dig up for you that get to some root issues that then you can discuss and address in a significant way. That's what I say as an unlicensed, unprofessional therapist.
And I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of this therapist. Y'all will probably know who I'm talking about. If not, I'll try to get back to the reference. Who wrote a book? She had family in the Holocaust. Actually, no, it was she and her sister who had survived the Holocaust. And she came to America and she married, she became a therapist. And I remember that she said, it's not just getting, if this was about a Holocaust survivor, it's not just telling the story, it's being, getting their anger. She would have them screaming and role playing, and she would become the oppressor. And the idea was to get those deep feelings of hatred and anger that they've been covering out. And that was the therapeutic part for her.
Yeah, that's my general concept of therapy, or at least successful therapies, is it's not just about talking about the surface level issue. It's about digging about what's going on in that issue that's bothering you, so that you can address some of the roots, feelings, emotions, problems that are underlying it. The part I do appreciate about Rabbi Sacks is so often it's hard to get out of, I'm very big into mindfulness and meditation, and it's very, we very much, that whole concept is very rooted in this moment, is the only moment we have, which is great. But sometimes we get so bogged down in what's going on right this moment that we don't actually think about the future we want to create. So that's the part I think Rabbi Sacks does add and contribute, is we need to build a better future. We need to have something that we're looking towards, that we're working towards, that we're building towards. That there has to be something good that we're focused on in the future, and we can't just get bogged down in what's happening now or in the past. How can we move forward into a more hopeful, better future? And that, I think, is something valuable that we always need to have at least one quarter of our eyesight on, is right. We can focus on today, but what are we doing today to make tomorrow better?
Rabbi, I would say too that if you embrace the tikkun, not you, but if we embrace the tikkun olam philosophy of healing the world, and that is the end goal or one of the end goals, then what you do each day matters in that moment. One conversation at a time. So there is building toward the future. If you look at your life and you say, I've worked toward that, maybe.
Yes, absolutely. And you never know what one moment, what effect it will have either. One of the stories I always think about is the story of Joseph. What happens to Joseph? Somebody tell the story of Joseph.
Pick one.
Huh?
I said a lot of things happened to him. Which one?
Okay. So what happened to Joseph?
Pick one.
No, tell the story of Joseph briefly. Not in 15 chapters of the Torah. If you were going to summarize the story of Joseph, what happens?
Thrown in a pit.
Okay. Why was he thrown in a pit?
Jealousy of his brothers.
Good. Jealousy of his brothers. So
Why
Jacob,
did he get a pretty coat?
he was given this extravagant garment, and his brothers were jealous. Not to mention Joseph made them jealous by talking about how they were all going to bow down to him with his dreams, and his parents were going to bow down to him too, etc., etc. Anybody remember how he got to the pit?
I just threw him in it.
Okay, how did he get to his brothers? Anybody remember?
Came to him.
So Jacob says to Joseph, your brothers are out pasturing the sheep in this area. Go find them. Like, go to them. Joseph goes to that area. They're not there. And he bumps into a random person not named in the story. It's just a man. Says, I'm looking for my brothers. And the man says, oh, they went that way. And he tells them where to find the brothers. The entire Joseph story hinges on this one encounter. If that man had not appeared at that time, Joseph would have turned around and gone home. Never would have been thrown into a pit, never would have been sold into slavery, never would have ended up in Egypt, never would have ended up in jail, never would have ended up before Pharaoh, etc., etc. It's this one 2 or 3 verse encounter that guides him to his brothers that leads to everything else that happens. Same thing with us, is that every encounter we have has a potential to have a giant impact. We don't always know what that impact will be. Pretty certainly that guy who Joseph bumped into in the field probably had no idea who Joseph was and no idea what happened to him after that. But the exodus from Egypt would never have happened if Joseph did not bump into this guy. Which is also why there's some commentators who say it wasn't just a person, it was an angel who was sent there to make sure he got to where he was needed to go. But it's important to keep that in mind also, that every encounter has power and potential to create a better future in addition. Any closing thoughts, comments?
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Good learning with y'all. Good discussion as always. Kol hakavod to y'all. Excuse me. We'll be back next week. I'm going to back up for 1 second. Thanksgiving, we won't have class on Thanksgiving. Would you like to find a different day that week to meet, or do we just want to double up the week after Thanksgiving?
Double up is my vote.
Double up.
Double up?
Yeah.
Okay. That's fine with me. So we'll meet next week. We'll take Thanksgiving off, and then we'll cover 2 parshiot the following week and go from there. So be well, everybody. If I don't see you, Shabbat Shalom. Don't forget, for those interested, there's a multi-faith Thanksgiving service tonight. Yours truly will be giving the homily, not to be confused with the hominy, which is completely different. Thank you for
Both be sweet.
But if I don't see y'all, take care of yourselves, be well, be healthy, and do good things.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Yeah.